All right, welcome everybody to Gen Y Jazz. This is my COVID time project to, discuss music and music philosophy and education and recording and composition with my friends. And I hope today's guest I can call a friend, but certainly he was one of my teachers. And really, all these people have been the great players on their instruments of our time, and certainly Joe Gilman is in that category of musician. Joe Gilman is a pianist, composer, recording artist, educator, which we're going to probably spend the most of today talking about. And I studied with him at the Brubeck Institute for 3 semesters. And I can tell you, Joe, that it was really life-changing. So how's that for an introduction?
That sounds great. I like that.
Well, we like it too. And Joe, if you don't mind, I might embarrass you with this one a little bit, but just for people who may not know you, I am going to read a list of some of your students.
Okay.
And these, of course, are just the ones I know from the Brubeck Institute. There are perhaps many others that I'm missing on this list, but Justin Brown, Joe Sanders, Ben Phlox, Colin Stranahan, Joel Ross, of course, Chad Lefkowitz Brown, Lucas Pino, the Zaleski brothers, Mark and Glenn, Chris Smith, Corey Cox, Malachi Whitson, and of course myself. but Joe, you've I guess as a way of introduction, I might ask you, how does a teacher get to a point where their students all become these really accomplished players and successful players?
Well, that particular list came specifically because of my relationship and the work that I was doing at the Brubeck Institute from 2002 to 2015 or so. Right. So in that particular instance, the students that came there were already very extremely good players, especially for their age group. All of them were 18 years old when I first met them, and I had experience working with them for somewhere between a year and a half each. So you happen to pick a particular list where there was some built-in success to begin with. I've got a vast number of other students who I've learned just as much from and had just a great time working with, that have gone on to all kinds of varied careers, in music and in other things, but I also feel just as proud of. So anyway, that's if you want to go to, well, how did I end up getting at the Brubeck Institute to begin with? How did that even happen? I mean, that's another story too. So
Well, I do want to ask you that, but maybe before we get there, I, I should say that was a very modest answer. And in my case, when I got to the Brubeck Institute, and perhaps this sounds like false humility, but if I'm being objective about my own situation musically when I was 18, I listened back and it's like I didn't have any vocabulary. I didn't feel like I had a lot of technique on the instrument. I didn't know the language. I couldn't play changes. And your tutelage changed that, you know. And I obviously had other teachers, but as far as just playing jazz, I think at that age you did more for me than anyone else. And I'm sure the people I mentioned would second that assessment. So there must be something in the way of teaching philosophy that is specific here. So maybe that's the question. Could you discuss your teaching philosophy and how you came to it?
How my teaching philosophy. So I think if I had to say one thing, it's more important to me that a student learns something than it is for me to teach something.
Mm.
So I guess what I mean by that is, you can put yourself in a situation, you can come all ready to go with all the curriculum in place and everything, But if you're going through that process and it's really not getting through to a student, it's really not particularly what the student happens to need, then maybe there's some adjustments that need to be made there. On the other hand, you might get into a situation where you're kind of just letting things roll, seeing where things go, thinking that you're not particularly you're not particularly ready, but all of a sudden you look up and the students are having a great time and they're all getting better. So in which case, which one was a better learning situation? In that case, the better learning situation was where the students were learning something. And so putting students in a situation where they are learning from each other and learning how to learn, or learning how to teach themselves, or learning, in years from now, when I'm gone from this place, will I be able to figure out a way to teach myself in the same way? So that to me is important if there's any kind of a philosophy about teaching. The Institute, I had to have an entirely different way of approaching those students than I've had teaching students at other places, for example, community college level, a state university level, or I've done a little bit of teaching as a sabbatical replacement at Indiana University, which was somewhat close to what you'd get at the Brubeck Institute. All of those places, I have to approach the pedagogy in a completely different way, for a variety of reasons, which I can get into. The age of the person that you're working with, that's a big thing. Are we talking about 14-year-olds, 18-year-olds, or 25-year-olds? They all, or 60 years old.
Right.
All those people learn different things in different ways. What is the peer group like? Is it an andragogical, which means are all these people in this room at the same time, all at completely different levels? Or are they all at pretty much the same level? Are they all pretty much at the same level at a very high level? Are they at the age of 18? I mean, all those things come into play. So in my particular instance with the Institute, I learned fairly early on that this was a exceptional group of students who had very particular needs. And I had to figure out how to best accommodate the way that they could get the most out of me and the Institute and themselves during those couple of years, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so the things that I would be teaching to exactly the same age group, 40 miles away at a community college, were just not going to work. I was going to be laughed out of that place. So I had to figure out, okay, obviously these people are playing at an incredibly high level for their age, but everybody has something to learn. So, at a certain point you go, well, even though I think these students might benefit from some things that are still at a very fundamental foundational level, are they really going to respond to that? If I have them playing their triads up and down through these standards, what is the community of learners going to feel like? I mean, that's probably not going to work. Might be what they need, but probably not going to work. So what ways can I impart to them that I respect them and I know that they're talented, but they do have a long way to learn, and do it in a respectful way? So those are some things that kind of go through my head as I'm, figuring out how to deal. Among other things. I mean, just to be, since I'm going down this road, I'll just let you know. I got to this group, and again, it was 2002, and that's where Justin and Joe and several other, phenomenal musicians were there at the same time, who might not be the names that you've recognized, but some of them have gone to New York and done quite well, or ended up going into entirely other occupations or whatever. But I said, I think that an approach where we and by the way, my own personal education, of many great educators that I've been around that taught me, The two most prominent were David Baker at Indiana University and Bill Dobbins at Eastman School of Music.
I have
Both of
both those names on a piece of paper here, and I wanted to ask you about them
them.
both.
Okay.
So I'm glad you're there.
So, so then I said, well, okay, the typical things I do with 18-year-olds in learning this music is not going to fly here. These people are just they're way more informed about the music than I would usually, there's some things that they already know about. On the other hand, maybe there's some historical, maybe there's pockets here and there of historical information. Maybe they really don't know that much about Lenny Tristano,
Hmm.
or maybe they don't know much about mid 60s or Miles or whatever. So that's when I said, well, maybe doing projects like this. Let's have, they all get together and they all play. They love playing. They love learning together. They're a group of guys, they, in most cases, guys. So that's where some of these project oriented things, and from David, he had this thing where study with the artist of your choice for a month. That was one of his things. So if you want to get better, hey, go buy everything you can of Sonny Rollins for a month, buy every record, learn as many solos as you can, study what he does, that kind of thing. Next month, move on to whoever it is, Jackie McLean or whoever you like. Right. So I kind of decided that project oriented type of thing would be good. They'd learn some tunes. They'd learn a little bit about the style. We'd immerse ourselves in the culture or whatever for a particular, and I think when we did it, I think it was always 5 weeks we would spend doing that. So then I said, hey, this is working. This works for this particular group of learners. It wouldn't work for my gang up 40 miles away, but it would work for these. Other things, do these people know any tunes? That was always a question I always wondered to myself, how important is it these days for jazz musicians to learn tunes? I don't know if I put that to you guys. I always was putting it to the groups of, in an effort to get them to think themselves, is when I was growing up in this music, I had to know standards. I mean, I had to learn them in different keys, and you had to learn bebop heads. But I'm 30 years older than you guys. So I'm thinking, these days, how important really is it for you to have a repertoire of 1,000 standards? Maybe it was important to Tommy Flanagan. Is that same thing true now? So that's why I was always kind of asking you guys about this. I mean, what is the value? And generally the fellows would come back and say, no, it's extremely valuable. You have to know the literature and the canon of all the standards and classics. And so we had a repertoire class, and we would, learn a couple tunes and talk about them and listen to classic recordings and that kind of stuff. So, I gradually found things that with that particular group of learners, they learned, they responded to it. We kept the curriculum moving. I tried to keep it from getting stagnant, in one thing for any too long of a period of time, but yet moving just enough so that they would, I always tried to make it so that the students were not feeling overwhelmed. I had to learn that too. I think when we first started the rep class, which you remember, it was 50 tunes a semester. These kids are so good, man. It's just not going to be a problem. These kids can learn 10 tunes a week, and 50 tunes a semester was just way too much. They have other things to do. They're human beings. They have lives. They've got other classes. They want to practice. They want to jam. They want to do stuff. So gradually, when we whittled that down to what essentially became a pretty reasonable number of 20, I don't know if you remember that or not, but
yeah,
it got down to about 20 tunes. Being able to know the tune, being able to play a decent solo through, recognize the harmony, do some analysis, things like that. But anyway, these things did not just come overnight. These came, and you'll probably find out, as most of your listeners will find out, that you learn way more from your students than they learn from you. So I was constantly learning, this works, this doesn't work. You don't do that again. Do way more of this, those are the kinds of things that are constantly going through my mind, when I'm teaching. Yeah. So those are some things.
Well, that was great. I kind of put you on the spot right out of the gun here, but the reason I did that was because I knew you would have an answer like the one you just gave. And you said two things that stuck out at me. The first was what you just said, namely that you learn more from your students than the other way around. And I can tell you, 8 episodes isn't a lot, but everyone I've had so far has been a teacher.
Yeah.
And I think I'll have to go back and listen, but I'm pretty sure you're the first one who's said that.
Okay.
So that's curious, and I'd love to pick your brain about that. But maybe before I do, I'll just say the other thing was that you mentioned this issue of adaptability, you know, which has been consistent across the board. And I've asked other guests about that issue, but generally the way I've conceived of it and sort of the way they would frame it is adaptability over curriculum.
Oh yeah.
But knowing you, I know that you're someone who has a curriculum, you know, and obviously you mentioned, 40 miles away. Can I say that's American River College,
Yeah.
right
Right.
here? Those kids, you have a curriculum there, but you had a
Yeah.
curriculum for us too. You had a theory book that you worked out of. You had, packets of like idiomatic
Yeah.
ideas, and that kind of fit into your repertoire styles aspect of the curriculum. So can you talk about both those things? First of all, adaptability versus curriculum, and secondly, um, learning from your students and how that
Uh,
occurs.
yeah. Adaptive. I mean, if 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 you're hired to go into a particular place and teach, impart information to a particular group of learners, to me, the most important, which in my case generally happens to be something related to jazz and jazz education, or theoretical, just typical musical theoretical concepts, which is what I do probably more than the jazz stuff, actually just happens to do with what I got hired to do many years ago,
Hmm.
as the bulk of my income, which is just basically just traditional theory kind of stuff. One of the first and most important thing I need to know is what is the population that I'm serving. So, and how long are we talking about? You want me to go in for an hour and talk to 60-year-old women about jazz? Well, okay, that's one thing. You want me to go to a camp in the middle of California and work with 14 to 17-year-olds? I could talk about exactly the same concepts that I would have talked to the 60-year-old women, but obviously the way that I impart the information and the depth and the level and who and what we talk about, all those things are different. So that's important to me. There's certain populations that I feel more comfortable with. If you asked me to give a jazz improvisation class to a group of senior citizens and it would last a year, I mean, I guess I could do that. It wouldn't. I would really have to put a lot of thought into what's going to be the most successful way to do this. Certain populations require certain kinds of psychologies that are not in my forte, if you know what I mean. I wouldn't be particularly good at learners on the very young sides of things. It just happens to be the fact that I just don't have that kind of experience. But back to the adaptability thing. Yeah, it's just like, okay, what is it that I'm going to do? How long do I have? And what's my population and what are they like? So kind of knowing that, having sort of different angles when you walk in, you have different angles that you're going to approach. And how are you going to impart the information and to what degree and to what level? I mean, so that's the adaptability. That's super, super important. And then the other part of the question had to do with, what was the second half of the question?
So, well, part of that adaptability thing was the curriculum thing, which you touched
Oh,
on, but
yeah.
also, man, now I'm forgetting too.
Yeah.
My
There
train
was
of
a second
thought.
half to that. Um, learning from your students.
That's right.
Right. So, given that you've got a particular amount of material or kinds of material that you're going to stand in front of a group of learners, and you do it the best that you can. I mean, the first time you do it, you're just kind of making some assumptions. How was I taught? How did my teacher teach me how to do this? About how much work do I think that these students are willing to handle and tolerate and be successful at, so on and so forth. So you just do your best. But the first time through it, you realize, kind of like I said, this particular thing worked. this particular thing didn't, this approach didn't work. How much do you engage? How much do you stand up and lecture? How much do you engage the learners? How much of the learning responsibility do you put on them? Those are all the kinds of things that you kind of have to sort of play with as you go semester by semester or year by year, those kinds of things, right? Also, pretty soon they start asking questions, and you get questions. I've never thought of that question before. And either you do your best to answer it, or you say, I don't know right now, but I'll get back to you. And, certainly over time, I could almost get to the point where I would get to a certain point in talking about something, and my mind already knew what questions were going to start coming back at me, because this is always the place in secondary function chords where people get all messed up. They can't figure it out. So I kind of know what angles are going to work and which angles aren't.
Right.
So as far as how to impart, and that again has a lot to do with the particular population. Okay. In a population of learners who have never gone down this before, and they're approximately in with this knowledge level and in this particular age group, I can sort of forecast where this is going to go, and you can kind of anticipate and kind of, lead things that way. But again, it takes sometimes several repetitions through a course to get to that point where you're like, I kind of know where this is going to go. I kind of know the kind of questions. So I got to sort of be ready, with extra, like you talk about handouts and things like that, some extra peripheral materials that when they talk about, you said enclosure, what exactly is that? Oh yeah, well, check this out. Here's this Clifford Brown solo or whatever it is, and let's go find these things. And, so anyway, yeah, I've just found that, me studying and knowing the information for myself, but knowing how to impart the information in a objective and organized way and sequential way, I've found to be important. That being said, leaving a certain amount for spontaneity and just letting things go where they go, I think is important too. I'll run an example of this to you. So in my early years of teaching this music theory class, I had the whole semester mapped out from day one. I had every day mapped out from day one. And I had almost down to the minute. I'm going to spend 15 minutes on key, whatever it is. And then, and then great, I'm all ready to go. And then you get it all mapped out and all ready to go. And sure enough, people start asking questions and you start getting behind, or then you get to this one and you had allotted 20 minutes for it, but it turned out you only needed 10. And then this one, you only allotted 10, but it turns out you needed 30, right? So gradually over time, I realized, well, I don't need to get this down to the minute. I need to kind of get this down to this week. We're going to study, whatever it is. We're going to study tritone subs. It could be anything, right? And so, okay, well, I got 5 main things that I want to talk about with tritone subs, and we'll just see how it goes. And if we're ahead of time, I can bring out more examples. Or I can demonstrate some things, or I can have one of the students demonstrate. You try it, you put a 2 in front of that whatever tritone sub thing or whatever, or do you got a recording or whatever? Or if we're behind, then you kind of say, okay, well, I have some more examples of this, but you get the general idea. And so having sort of, okay, here's the area, and now I got about a week to play with, or whatever it is, that's kind of how my style sort of evolved. We're a little bit behind on this, so we can get ahead on this, sort of having some give, so there can be some times for spontaneous things to happen.
Sure.
And as you probably know, a lot of times the best learning happens in those spontaneous times. That's when someone, all of a sudden, a light goes on in the middle of your lecture. And if you've actually given, hey, I got 15 minutes to play with, if someone's light goes on and they raise their hand and they go, can you do it this way? I just thought of that, And I go, I never thought of that either. Yeah, I guess that might happen. Let's check that out. Let's everybody get on your instruments and let's try that. If you've allotted some spontaneity, some time to play with, you got that. You don't have to look and you say, well, go try that on your own and write a discussion post about it. I mean,
Right.
Sure, great. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I can attest to that. I mean, everything you've said so far is true, and I've experienced it from you directly, so I can attest. But to the point you made about leaving room for spontaneity, I can remember one or two occasions where you picked up Joel's mallets and
Yeah. Right.
played
Right.
vibes,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
or whatever, just some funny thing like that, where suddenly the experience of being in a classroom
Yeah.
was fun. And I know that's a little bit of a cliche way to put it, but it
Yeah.
was it
Right.
was it was a way to express something to us that we might not have listened to if it were just the whiteboard or
Right. Right.
just
Right.
the handout.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question there is, to what extent does personality play a role? Your personality, the teacher's personality.
Yeah. I mean, a tremendous amount, um, on many levels. I mean, this is why I think I stated earlier that I don't know how good I would be at really young learners. Um, Not that I couldn't learn how to do it. It's just that, um, I'm great with kids, with my own kids, and on a personal level. But get 47-year-olds together, I'm just no good. So that's just not me. And again, my personality at the Brubeck Institute was slightly different than it is at some of the other schools that I teach
Sure.
at. So I do want to be real and authentic. When I'm in front of you guys, I want you to know that, yeah, this is really how I am. But there's certain ways that I behave in front of a particular group of learners that it's just like, you talk to your professors one way and you talk to your peers another way. I mean, it's very much like that. So kind of learning what way to get across information to this particular group of learners draws them in, makes them feel comfortable, and garners the most results. It gets them to learn. That's really super important. I have a thing in my early years of teaching. I wanted to be all my students. I wanted to be their buddy, and that had repercussions. That was actually not a good thing for me. It might work for other people. It did not work for me because it didn't take long, and pretty much they said, "Oh, that's just Joe, and he'll let you get away with anything." And then people aren't showing up to rehearsals, and then I'm going, "Oh, that's cool. Okay, I'll see you at the next one. It's groovy, whatever, and oh, you don't have your part learned? Well, keep working, geez, there's a certain amount of that when you're and by the way, when I started teaching, I wasn't that much older than a lot of my students. So that I discovered, it took me a while that I couldn't be, there had to be a separation. There had to be some kind of separation between the teacher and the student. Because if there wasn't, then because you do want the student to have some feeling of looking up to you as a person who knows what they're doing, expects things of you, and you have to accomplish these things and you have to be accountable. There has to be some level of that.
Right.
That being said, if it's done in an entirely strictly academic way with no kind of love or feeling or camaraderie or whatever mixed in there, then a lot of learners will get turned off. It's just like too dry or whatever. So to me, I had to sort of figure out, and I'm still working on it,
Sure.
a way to build in this accountability. We can be friends. I mean, I like you, I respect you, but I need you to get this done. And if you don't get it done, then there's going to be consequences, whatever those consequences are. I'm not a heavy. I don't like coming down on heavy people. It's just not my personality. So my accountability has to do in the grade situation. So if you just don't do the work, you didn't do the work, and your grade ends up suffering. Well, that's the way it works for me, or that I generally do it. And some students respond to that and others don't. So I hope that somewhat answers your question. I think I might have gone tangential on that question, but that's sort of the personality is what you had talked about. For example, of my two major professors and I've had many, and some of them are great, but David was like I don't know if people still know who Bill Cosby is. I hope people still know who Bill Cosby is, because my daughter, I asked her the other day, and she didn't know who Bill Cosby was. So we're getting to that. We're getting to that stage. Yeah, people don't know who people are, but going to classes with David Baker was like going to class with Bill Cosby. But he was so unbelievably productive and such a great educator and so knowledgeable that he could sort of be lighthearted and funny, and still you knew you were going to be learning an awful lot.
Yeah.
Bill Dobbins, who again I respect equally as much as David and any other educator I've ever come across in my whole life, had a little less lighthearted approach. It was a little bit more, it was slightly more academic. It was slightly more analytical and, that kind of stuff. But still, it was like, here's we're going to outline this semester. Here's the projects that are going to be involved. Here's what you're going to be expected to do. And, that was the way it is. But backed it up with all kinds of work and your reputation that had preceded them, which, again, I think is another part of being an educator. When I first got to the Institute, most of these kids didn't know me. In fact, I don't think any of them knew me, and I hadn't developed any kind of a track record at the place at all. And so when I'm starting to give, assignments, there's a little bit of the, really, what's this about? Why are we doing this? There's a little bit of that, really, is this, I don't know if I want to do this, right? But gradually over time, as I'm there longer and as more and more of these students are getting out and they're getting out into the real world and they're playing with people that are all over Downbeat magazines and all that kind of stuff, then the word sort of trickles in the background that the Institute has these people that come from there, and there's this way of teaching that, I guess in my case, I was doing the majority of the teaching there, at least with the fellows. There's this guy and here's what he does and here's how it works and stuff like that. And then by the time you or some of the other people get there, you kind of have, there's a little bit of a, what's it called? Street, the word on the street.
Yeah.
Right. Is kind of out a little bit. And, and so I can kind of walk into a classroom and people, there's sort of a built-in respect there already. That does not happen overnight. That happens over, unless you're someone like Christian McBride who walks in the door and it's like, I've never taught here before, but it's like, people know who that person is. If you don't have that, then it takes a while for you to develop that, over time. So those are all the psychological aspects of, being a teacher.
I'm really glad you said that, because I don't think I've put enough thought into that in my own teaching, and my whole thing is I want students to be comfortable. I mean, in my age group, I'm 25. People my age tend to teach teenagers, and teenagers are not necessarily, committed to the music in the way that a 20-year-old is committed to the music, So I have experienced some of the same, like, yeah, we're pals, so you didn't practice, and whatever.
Right.
So that's a great point. And I, once again, I'll attest that, as far as the balance aspect of it, you are one of the most naturally funny teachers I've ever had. Right before this stream, you were cycling through these different backgrounds on your computer, and that was hilarious. You were clearly indulging in it, and I can remember one lesson you came into class and you said, "All right, everybody," and you wrote some bizarre gibberish on the board, and you go, "This is all your names in Star Wars." We're like, "What?" And that's how we started that class.
Yeah.
So just those funny things, and that went a long way for me, personally, and I know it did for these other guys too. All right, I appreciate you starting off there, but now can we maybe backtrack in your life and just get the story of like how music came into your life? So first of all, Joe, where are you from?
I'm from a suburb of Sacramento, which is called Carmichael, California. So essentially I'm from a suburb of a medium-sized metropolitan city of 500,000 people, middle of state capital.
And approximately how old were you when you started playing music?
I started piano lessons when I was 7, and I took from a classical piano teacher who took me through the typical method books for a while and so that's second grade, until a little bit of a fire lit under me around the time I started getting into ragtime music, which was the 6th grade. And this guy was flexible enough to divert his particular curriculum and say, okay, well, if you're into that, why don't you start learning some of that? So I got into ragtime. I also kind of around that same time got into some of those Vince Guaraldi Peanuts, Linus and Lucy-ish kind of stuff. So a little bit of jazz might have been lingering in the background down there. Got into high school, and there was a jazz band, which I wasn't in, but I heard them rehearsing at 7:00 in the morning. Well, I didn't walk in at the beginning, but I heard them. That's pretty cool. What's that all about? And looked at the piano player's music, and it was like, how can you play this? What's AM? What am I supposed to do with that? Where's all the notes? And then I saw this, they were playing like Maynard Ferguson charts or something, and there was like all this AM and all these guys jamming, I'm like, what are you playing? Anyway, so that went on. And right, almost exactly the same. It's like several things happened right around there, beginning of high school. Number one, there was a PBS, right, a public broadcasting system had this jazz festival where all these different jazz artists came on. It's 1976, I think. Ellington and stuff. Dave Brubeck Quartet was playing. It was a reunion thing, and they played Take Five. And I don't know what it was, but I just really, really liked that. I went out and bought Time Out. It was my first jazz album. No, wow. And then my sister bought me this record called Piano Giants. It was released on, I think it was Prestige, and it had like one cut by all these famous jazz pianists from, I think starting at, I don't know who it started with. It might have started with Ellington and ended up at Keith. One cut from all these different people, 2-record set. Other things were happening too, like Merv Griffin show. I mean, I'm really stretching here. Merv Griffin show, which was a daytime talk show, had a really great jazz band on it. Ray Brown was on it.
Yeah.
My player's name I'm escaping, but really great. I went to the Carmichael Library, see if they had any jazz records. They had 3. They had Oscar Peterson, Another Day. They had Herbie Hancock, VSOP, and they had this really obscure Eddie Harris record.
Wow.
And so I pulled out the, and I pulled out the, there might have been some other things that happened in between there. I remember hearing Monty Alexander on the Merv Griffin show. That just really blew me away. So those are the things that are kind of percolating at the beginning of high school. I started taking some jazz piano lessons, and then I was kind of hooked, so for the remainder of high school, I was kind of hooked and getting better and figuring out this improvisation thing. Mom bought me a subscription to Downbeat magazine. I started reading, started hanging out at Tower Records on the weekends, picking up all the records and reading all the liner notes. That's how I was getting my history. Records were $2.99 each. I could spend all my allowance money on jazz records, which I had no clue what it was I was supposed to be buying, but I kept picking and choosing and found some things that were good and other things that weren't. Still playing classical music along all this time. So I was sort of dabbling in both, and then decided to become a music major, of which jazz at that point, I mean, I was nowhere near the level that you guys were. I could play an F blues pretty good. Remember, I could play Georgia. I don't know, maybe a couple. I could play Blue Rondo all the Turk. At any rate, but just gradually got into it more, and started at a state school at Sacramento State here. I was in the jazz band. They didn't have a jazz major. Those things didn't really exist back then a whole lot. But then transferred to Indiana University, and that's where I started meeting people like Robert Hurst and Chris Bodie and Edgar Meyer and Jim Beard and Ralph Bowen, and all these people are like, my age, and they're all like way better than me. And I'm like, I guess I better get my act together, so, and of course, learning from David and a lot of other folks. So that's kind of the trajectory over about that past 6 years or so. When I started my graduate work at Eastman, again, Bill Dobbins' approach was a little bit more, you're doing graduate work, so it should be a little bit more research oriented, more methodical approach. Not that David wasn't, but it was more, here's a project oriented things, transcribe 3 pianists from the hard bop era and compare and contrast their solos, and you're doing these academic kinds of things, which worked into my personality pretty well. I like playing, but I also like learning. I like the process of learning and how to learn and what are the different ways to learn. And when you've learned something 6 times already, is there a different way to learn it or to organize it in your mind? So anyway, that's what was happening sort of up through my mid-20s, I guess. That kind of gives you the snapshot of the first beginnings.
Yeah, you know, first of all, I didn't realize Indiana is where you met Bob Hurst. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I guess you must have maintained a relationship over the years because you have that record with him. Can I talk about that record for a second?
Is this the Treasure Chest record?
Treasure Chest. So Joe Gilman has a lot of albums. I think a dozen plus albums, right? And uh, that one I'm familiar with because you told me about it last summer. And it has Bob Hurst, Jeff Tain Watts, and of course Joe Henderson. So how did you get from grad school at Eastman to making a record with that band?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a pretty cool story. So after graduate school, I came back to Sacramento. Probably the main reason was because I had joined this fusion band called the Henry Robinette Group, and he had a little record deal, and so I joined his band to kind of promote that record, and we were gonna all be on the road and being big jazz stars and all this kind of stuff. We were gonna do it through that group and through this label that he was on. But so I was in Sacramento, and gradually what happened with that band is we had a steady Tuesday night gig and a few other gigs here and there, and I was eking out a living as a jazz musician, doing all kinds of things in Sacramento, California. I mean, I was making music for player piano companies, and I was playing solo piano gigs and jazz gigs. I was in a country band. I was in a progressive R&B band. I don't know if you've ever heard of this band called Club Nouveau. They had a hit with Lean on Me back in the late 80s. I joined the support band for that group in the late 80s. I mean, I was doing everything. I was in keyboards and the whole thing. Yeah, I was just, and I got about 5 years into this, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I only like 10% of the gigs I'm playing. I just got to do something else with my life. So I decided to quit music entirely and to become a lawyer. So at the age of 28, I guess, somewhere around there, maybe 27, somewhere around there, I decided I'm going to apply to law school. I'm going to become a lawyer, and then I'm just going to play gigs on the weekend. I'm going to have a happy life where I can, make a good income and play gigs when I want to. So around that time, the thought came into my mind, well, yeah, but I don't want to just give up. I need to have some kind of thing that would present a legacy of to what level I attained at one point in my life. So that's when and there's a little bit more to the story too, but that's when I decided to just go ahead and just make a record with, people that I wanted to make a record with. So I called up Bob and I said, hey, I'm thinking of doing this record. It was going to be, at that point, it was going to be all Cole Porter tunes. And so I called up Bob and I said, I really would like to use Herlin Riley. And he says, I know Herlin Riley, but I play with Jeff and I really like Jeff. He says, I've got Herlin's contact. Long story. Anyway, Jeff ended up agreeing to it. And it was all, I had to kind of, the stars had to align. I had to set it up for a time that I could get studio time. And at that point, those guys were playing with Branford. So I had to figure out a time when they were going to be through town with Branford and I could get some studio time. So I lined that all up. And, also, well, now then there's the Joe Henderson part of that, which is, it was going to be a trio record. And then I think the label that I had that was kind of going to be booking, supporting this project, they kind of backed out of it. But here I had already contracted these guys and I had already, booked the studio time. And so here I am looking at some debt. However, it didn't really matter to me at that point. It's like, okay, I'm going to make this record with Bob Hurst and Jeff Watts. And while I'm at it, I mean, I had a friend who was a radio disc jockey and a drummer, and he knew Joe Henderson. So this is 1990, I think. And at that time, Joe Henderson's career was in this sort of mid-rangey slump. I don't know if slump is the right word, but he was doing an awful lot of playing, doing one to three tune guest appearances on all kinds of people's records.
Hmm.
So look at Joe Henderson's output between about 1987 and 1992, and you'll see that he's just on all kinds of people's records. And so he happened to live in San Francisco. So I ended up getting his contact information and ended up, calling him up and saying, hey, I'm making this record. You don't know who I am, but I'm making this record with these guys. And would you be willing to, play some tunes on it? And to make a long story short, he basically agreed and to play three tunes on the album. And so that's how that came about. And then everything all lined up and we got together for one afternoon. No, it was actually two. I think it was spread over 2 days. So yeah, it was great. It was an incredible experience, obviously. Yeah.
It must have been really something, but I guess as a follow-up, I might ask, since you brought up law school, what
Yeah.
happened
Oh,
that diverged you,
right.
in a different direction?
Right. Important part of the story. So here I am, I'm selling my house, I'm selling my keyboards. I made that record. I'm in debt. But I'm getting ready to go to law school in San Francisco. And then I'm over at American River College playing like this noontime concert or something. I forget what it was. And one of the full-timers there said, hey, we have this job opening over here. You ought to think about applying for it. I had already applied for a few college jobs at that point. I hadn't gotten them, obviously. I had sort of given up. It's, everybody's got a tolerance level for how long you can keep going down one road until finally you say, this just is not going to work for me. But my tolerance level was somewhere around 6 years. And so I said, okay, sure, I'll apply for it. So I applied for this job, and it just happened to be a job that was predominantly a music theory position, but they also wanted the person to either teach the jazz band or teach the concert band. And so, yeah, okay, I could do jazz band, and I've done that before, and I could teach theory, I suppose. I went through all my theory classes and did pretty well. So anyway, I applied for the job and, kept moving up the chain and got to an interview and, got through all the subsequent interviews after that and the teaching demonstrations, and they hired me. And it was like unbelievably big risk for those people because I really had absolutely no teaching experience other than a little at teaching a combo at the state university nearby and maybe one little improv class or something. I had no teaching experience. So it was a big risk on their part. And to be honest with you, if I applied for the job with those same credentials today, there would be no way I would get this job.
Why is that?
Because I had a master's degree. Nowadays, I mean, not that people with master's degrees can't get jobs, but there's so many people out there with DMAs and stuff applying for the same job. I had virtually no street cred whatsoever. But I had some street cred in town. And the people on the committee had heard of me and knew of my reputation locally. And I did a good teaching demonstration. And they took a chance on me. And I got the job. And, of course, you go through the tenure process. And so I think it was 4 years of that, which at the community college level in California, it's not a grueling process. It's basically show that you can teach and be accountable and show up to work and don't have too many complaints from the students, and if you do, then know how to address them. And so it wasn't like heavy research based and publishing and all that kind of stuff that doesn't really happen at the community college level. So once that job sort of solidified for me, which would have been in the mid 90s, then I sort of had my launching pad, you might say, for me for the rest of my life, which meant I have a solid base of income on top of which I can do other creative things should I decide to do that. Right. I've got 4 months a year that are free that I can, go and play, or I can play gigs on the weekends. I can make recordings. I can, do other things like that. So for me and my lifestyle and how I saw my life progressing, it worked really well for me. Obviously, once I got that job, then I declined the law school acceptance.
Sure.
And started.
And obviously I should say Treasure Chest, I believe, came out in 92.
Right.
And prior to that, you had a handful of albums
Yeah.
released already.
Yeah.
Could you talk about those? I mean, if you've got, I don't know the exact number, 4 or 5 albums released,
Yeah.
and then you decide music is not for me before all this happens, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Could you talk about what that experience was like a little bit, putting out
Sure.
those other albums, those early
Yeah.
albums?
All right. So like I said, I had come to Sacramento to join this fusion band, and in the process of working on that record, the label kind of became interested in me. Now, again, this is sort of an upstart label. It was called Artful Balance. At this time in the late 1980s, there was a style of music called New Age, which was extremely popular. It's like, if you don't know who George Winston is, you can Google him, but this is like this music of mostly meditative solo piano, very friendly melodies, lots of white key music, sort of like a watered down Keith Jarrett meets Bill Evans meets Eric Satie. And they were, and that's kind of where this label was coming out of. And so they kind of pinned me to sort of be, okay, so we can have this fusion band, and then we can have Joe, having his own things out. So if we put on concerts, we'll have 2 artists from the label, and these kind of things, these are the marketing things that are happening and stuff like that. But so my first album was actually just called It's My Name. And if you ever see it, like the album artwork was, they had certain aspects of this label were very well put together. I mean, they knew that it all got down to the music and the vibe and the presentation and the artwork, and it all had to kind of align with a certain vision, which is how this Windham Hill label sort of got so successful. I mean, it was a branding, it was a package deal, and so they were going for that. I had to, can I do whatever I want? Yeah, you can do whatever you want, but we're kind of looking for this and that. So, it turned out after a while, I sort of had to be playing in a particular aesthetic. I had to kind of be playing in a particular way. So here I am being this jazz dude from, studied all this heavy stuff. And my first opportunity to record is some pretty lightweight stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then the situation got even weirder. So I'm writing all this music, and then I got all these titles, and then they changed the names of all my songs because they didn't match the audience. This audience for this music is going to be people that go out and drink wine on the weekends and go to vineyards and stuff like that, or people with Ivy League education. So all the names got changed, and then gradually the music industry changed. So new age music wasn't so popular anymore, but fusion, or this thing called new adult contemporary, this is this kind of music which some people just call backbeat jazz or whatever, that became more popular. So now they're taking my record and they're saying, okay, we want you to add some beats to your tunes. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is solo piano.
Right.
Well, can you at least add some synthesizers? So it's like, here I am, a 23-year-old kid kind of doing whatever they told me to do. That was my first record, if that makes any sense. The second one, by that time, they had become sort of this full-fledged, like, backbeat jazz, The Quiet Storm, and all these different radio formats. And so by that time, I don't know what happened to me, but I got all into progressive R&B with people like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and LA and Babyface and all this kind of stuff. And I got all these synthesizers and drum machines, and I was writing all these pop tunes and stuff like that. And so that second album, it takes this like super hard, I don't know what, left or right or up or down, I don't know what you call it, but anyway, it was like, where'd this come from, and then, so this is all the things that sort of led up to me saying, and then plus there was no support from the label. It was like, put out these albums, and then you're thinking, okay, cool, so now we're gonna get some gigs, right? And it was just like crickets, just like nothing, like, well, and then these things are getting reviewed in magazines, and they're getting panned because they're like so overly commercial. I'm thinking, well, this isn't what I wanted to do.
Right.
I wanted to be a jazz musician, and here I am doing these things I didn't really want to do, and then they're getting panned, and then I'm not making any money, and then I'm like, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's like my 20s in a nutshell, basically.
Sure. Well, so a few questions. Maybe the first one would be, how did you get out? How did you escape?
So my escape was that right around the time I was, like applying to law school and all this kind of stuff, the label got sold to someone else, and then other things started to happen. Then they lose their what's it called? Not distribution. They lost a distribution deal. Then, you know, they get sold, and then they're not interested in this. So finally, it was just like the whole label was sort of in this cattywampus stage of who knows what's going on where, or whatever. The original owner of the label quit his own label. I mean, it's just like, you know. And then I got this job at American River. Then I quit the fusion band, which was tough because it was a good group of guys, and I love those guys, and I love playing that music. But I got this job. So basically, what happened is I got a job, and I left a lot of that stuff behind.
So now you're teaching, and obviously since then you've done a lot of things. You've made other records, for example.
Yeah.
But I'm curious at what point. Well, maybe let's start with this. You said you had no street cred, right? No DMA.
Yeah.
What was the experience of teaching like at that level, at that stage of your life? You know, teaching, I guess, that age group, 18 to 22.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, at first I had to figure out I had to figure out what to do. I mean, I had to teach this stuff. I had to learn how to teach it. I understood the material, but I didn't really know how to impart the information yet. So I had to figure that out over a couple of years. The students had to acclimate to my style, and I had to acclimate to that population group and to their style. I kind of had to learn what works and what didn't. I kind of had to learn what amount of work can I expect, what quality of work can I expect. If I want a higher quality of work, do I want to assign less? Do I want to assign something different? You learn all those things. You just take your time. And gradually, and it takes a few years, but gradually as you're figuring it out and they're figuring you out, then pretty soon the street cred, if I might say, at an educational institution can start to take shape. So, and again, that can go either way. I mean, it can go up or it can go down. It could be good or it could be bad. I mean, you can ruin your reputation, or you can, in my case, in general, I think as long as you're consistent and people know what to expect from you, then, you know, then word on the street gets out. Yeah, this guy, he's a good teacher. I don't like the way he does this, but he does this stuff really well. And you'll know what to expect, and you'll know how you're doing in the class all the time. And you know, those kind of things. I think students appreciate that. You know, what's the more frustrating thing to a student to go, what's due? I don't even know what's due, and I don't even know how to do it. You know, I mean, what's more frustrating to a student? But what's due today? A, B, and C are due, and here's exactly how he wants you to do it, and it's due at this time. You know, those kind of objective things. I personally think that students appreciate that. I want to do well in your class. What do I need to do? You know, those are things that I think conscientious, good students like. So over time, my street cred, at least in the academic realm at a community college where I am, it got better. So now as far as the institute, so that's a whole other world. So how did that? Well, because now here I've got this full-time job at a community college. You know, where did this other thing come from?
Yeah.
So stars align. You know, I mean, one event can happen in your life and just change everything for the rest of your life. I mean, I got that job at the community college, changed my life. I happened to have this band, which was called Capital Jazz Project. When I got into college gig, I still wanted to play, so I put this repertoire ensemble together with a bunch of the better local players in my area, and you know, every 3 months we'd do a different theme. So, you know, Charlie Parker 80th birthday, you know, Miles, 50s Miles, whatever it is. Well, that's right. That was one of our early ones. Was Charlie Parker's 80th birthday, right? So that put you back a little bit.
Wow.
So the Brubeck Institute's coming down in Stockton, and again, it's 50 miles away. We just happened to be doing this theme of Dave Brubeck right around that same time.
Wow.
The local DJ on the radio station happened to be getting together with JB Dias, who was the director at that time, and got him on the radio show. He says, you got to meet Joe Gilman. You know, he's kind of like our local piano guy, right? So we went out to lunch. I talked to JB. I got to meet him. I said, hey, we're doing this Dave Brubeck thing. You ought to come. He says, yeah, I'd love to come. I really want to come, you know, and he came to the concert and he saw it. And, you know, and those concerts, we would play the music, but I'd do a fair amount of, this next tune is Kathy's Waltz, and it's written for Dave's daughter. And the name is spelled wrong. And I'd say all these, you know, things, you know, about it. And it was, you know, it's relatively entertaining, kind of like a lecture concert, but I put some of my own weird personality into it, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, he saw the concert and he says, "Hey, I would love for you to come down and spend a week with the fellows. We have these guest artists that come down and spend a week, and I'd love you just to come in and just spend a week working on Dave's music with them." And so I did that 1 week. And after that 1 week, he said, "Hey, would you be willing to come down and teach 2 classes this semester to the fellows? We only got one local person who's working with them. Would you do it?" And then one thing leads to another. "Hey, can you do 3 next semester? Can you teach our piano player?" Next thing you know, I'm down there all the time. Then the next thing you know, JB leaves. Then the guy who came in to take his place, actually 2 people later, was Steve Anderson, who really appreciated me. He really liked me. He thought I did a good job with the fellows, and he respected me as a musician. So he says, "I just want you to be here all the time, as much as you can be." And that's how that sort of developed over a period of about 3 years in there. So the next thing you know, I got a full-time job down here, and I got a half-time job over there. And my brain is going 2 different directions. I'd be on those drives down to Stockton, and my brain would literally have to say, "You are not in community college mode anymore. You're going to talk with to work with the fellows, and they're a totally different population of learner. They have different things that they respond to and things that they won't respond to." And so I had to kind of, make that switch on the drive down. That makes sense.
It certainly does. Do I understand correctly that you and Dave were friendly, Dave Brubeck?
Well, yeah, you could say that. I mean, Dave, I met him several times during the early years. He would come down during the summers a little bit in the colonies. He would come to visit once a year. He would come and show up and play a little bit at the festivals. And then once he got to know me a little bit, I mean, actually, once Dave knew I was going to be teaching the fellows a little bit, I show up home one day and there's a box on my front doorstep. And it was Dave had sent me every published thing that he had ever published
Wow.
in a box.
No
And
kidding.
they had a family, a person who helped Dave and Iola. I forget what his name was, but he was sort of he might have even lived with them, but he was a close personal friend associate who would help them with their business dealings. Not their attorney and not his music director, a different guy. And he mailed it all to me. And then I started going through all these books. And I go, wow, I never heard any of this music before. It was all these obscure tunes I really didn't know. And I started playing through them. And then this is where those Brubeck records, the next group of records came from, which was like, I got together with Joe and Justin over in, what was it, Owen Hall or whatever. And
Yeah.
let's play this one, And Joe and Justin would play, Tony and Ron, and I'd be over there hanging on for dear life. And I'm like, this stuff sounds, even when you play it this way, it sounds so modern, It's cool. So I said, this would be really cool. I'm going to do a project of just Dave's tune. We're going to modernize all these things. We're going to put some different twists and turns on them. So that happened. Right.
And those records, I should say, Time Again, Brubeck Revisited, volumes 1 and 2. Yeah. And Joe and Justin, as you mentioned, Joe Sanders and Justin Brown. And you're right, it does sound very modern. The arrangements are killer. Yeah. And of course, those are your arrangements, but the playing is killer. And I think probably the first recording of you I ever heard was Blue Rondo a la Turk.
Oh, really?
On volume 1.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's who Joe Gilman is. Okay,
Wild. Yeah, that's a wild cut, man. Yeah, we recorded 17 songs in 7 hours.
Wow.
And then the Stevie Wonder ones were 28 tunes in 13 hours.
And of course, those are Wonder Revisited.
Yeah, right.
1 and 2. Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I think the Brubeck but the Brubeck thing is cool just because of my connection to it. Right.
Yeah.
But the Stevie Wonder stuff is really cool too, and it speaks volumes about your own character and your own style, I should say, that you would record with your own students. And of course, you've done that a few times, right? I really like the album Relativity that you did, which was 2011, 2012?
Well, I think we recorded that in 2010, but it came out in 2012, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, The musicians at the Brubeck Institute, those 18 to 20-year-old kids were unbelievably talented. And I knew them well and I was playing with them a lot and the music felt great and I knew what I could write and what would work and what wouldn't. And, it all just, and I felt pedagogically it was good. It showed my respect for my students. I respect you enough to want to go into a studio and record some of my own projects with you. I think that put a lot of mileage on my relationship with the fellows. I wish I had done more. I mean, I did. There's this phantom Paul Simon project that happened in between the Stevie Wonder one and the it was AmeriCanvas, I think.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I worked for 3 years trying to come up with these Paul Simon arrangements, and I was working with Chris Smith and Corey Cox, and I don't know if I did anything with any of the other rhythm sections, but I tried so hard, and I just couldn't get enough repertoire together to make it work. I mean, Dave's music works obviously because they're jazz oriented compositions. Stevie Wonder's tunes fall a lot into the traditional jazz, melodic information, typical song forms, 2/5s, and typical progression. Man, Paul Simon's music is just, first of all, I mean, he's written an unbelievably great amount of music. It's phenomenal, but a lot of it is very lyric based. There's not a lot of the tunes that have melodic hooks, I guess, to me, or were not familiar enough to a general public to warrant enough jazz renditions of, if that makes sense. So that was one of those 3 years that was just like beating your head against the wall, trying to do something, and it just didn't happen. So at that point is when I kind of started going down these other routes with other types of themes like painters and stuff like that. Yeah.
Cool. Well,
we had one with you, right? So we had when you came along, I think we did it was the guy who was the paint. Wait, I remember we had one where everybody in the band wrote a tune.
Right.
And was that based on a theme? Did I give you size? We're all going to write something based on this theme.
I remember yours was the painting, and it was like I don't know who the painter was, but it was like a dinner scene. And I don't remember what everyone else did. I know that I just did a minor blues.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which you arranged, and the arrangement is killer. Yeah, I don't know if there was a theme. There must have been, but I don't really remember.
Yeah. So that helped. If I was going to get the fellows, if I wasn't going to record, I'd say, hey, let's all write an arrangement let's figure out what it is. And I think there was, who was the painter for the Saturday Evening Post?
I don't know.
You don't know? Oh, shoot. You'd recognize his paintings, but we had Norman Rockwell. There was a year, and it was just prior to you coming, because I remember Tom Kelly being there and Malachi and a few others. So it was just before you getting there. But we said, everybody pick a Norman Rockwell painting and write a tune based on it, So that was a lot of fun. Those are fun projects. I mean, those are things that get outside the normal, analyzing tunes and practicing your symmetrical diminished scales or whatever it is. Ooh, I have to write this tune based on this poem or something. That's another cool way to stretch your imagination.
Well, Dr. Gilman, this is going to perhaps span, not only your time at the Institute, but prior to, all your time at ARC. But I'm curious from a pedagogical standpoint, if there were any specific lessons you got from Bill Dobbins or David Baker that you applied to teaching.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't know if you remember, but there was a day when you and Joel and Sarah and Jalen and there was someone else in there, Max or whoever else was in the band at that time. We had a pedagogy class, and I sat down. We all sat in a circle, and I said, I want everybody to tell me who your favorite teacher is and what you learned from them. Right? I don't know if you remember this day.
I do remember, yeah.
And I remember it very well because it had a big influence on me. And everybody sat around and they all said who their best teacher was. I said, now, what did you learn from them? And it was almost like everybody said, I don't know. They were just really cool. They really had their act together. So it was almost like the impression that the impression that the instructor left with you, or the fact that they were so committed to what they were doing, was more important than any particular thing that you learned. Now, I can go through pockets of my life and I can say, I remember this day in US history when I was a junior, that this particular teacher said this one thing. So with Bill Dobbins, for example, I cannot tell you one thing that I learned specifically from that person, but I can tell you that his commitment to the music, and he's just transcribed everything in the history of music, and he just knew so much and about, it was more about that. If you're going to be serious about this music, you've got to be studying and you got to be working and you've got to, be learning all the time. There's just no stopping learning, right? So that's kind of so I can't think of any particular lesson from Bill. It was just that level of commitment from Bill. Literally, you could walk, this is a grown man with a family, for crying out loud. And you could probably walk by his office at 10:30 at night and he's in his office transcribing, or working on some arrangement or something like that, so that, with David, again, it wasn't, I can't think of anything in particular other than what were the types of things that we did. So, he also was relatively big on transcribing and analyzing. He was really big on composing all the time and orchestrating and trying to, he was really big on mixing 20th century classical techniques into his jazz compositions. So, which you might sort of call third stream, although they never really came across that way for me, but they could have been that way. So, and his delivery, kind of the fact you all come into class and here comes David and he's always got some distraction going on, he always had some thing that he was really excited about or really belly aching about at the beginning of class, or he was scrambling to find the paper that we were supposed to be, looking at today or whatever. It was always sort of this, yeah, we're going to get some learning done, but I got some other stuff I got to get through first. I'm going to tell you this story first about Max Roach and, those kinds of things. So it had more of a organic, visceral effect, you might say, on my feeling about what it meant to be committed to the music and to impart the information and, the organization, but freedom within that. So it was more about that. I mean, I can go back to the jazz piano teacher I had when I was in high school and tell you I learned, he taught me this, and he taught me how to voice chords in my left hand, and he taught me, all my modes, and I could nail that guy down, but he's not a big name. But David, when you get to that level, it's sort of, it's more of a philosophical or, just overall approach to going through life with this music. You're kind of married to it. And I think if your students feel the level of commitment from you, how much you love it, and why you love it, and showing them things that you love, and like this, I love this measure right now. Listen to that measure, like what's so good about that measure? You don't hear it? Check it out again. Those are the kinds of stuff that are fun to do for me. Anyway.
Well,
Wish
Joe,
I answered that question better.
that was a great answer. And, I'll say a couple things. First of all, I did the Eastman summer camp a couple times, and I met Bill Dobbins. And that was kind of my impression. I don't, I couldn't tell you exactly he might not have even been on faculty. He might have just been there playing a concert or something. But I remember we all kind of looked up to him like, wow, this guy is the real deal. David Baker, I think I might have met him at the Gen conference shortly before he passed, but I never got to know him or anything. But with you, Joe, I've referenced on this show several times that I have probably 4 or 5 individuals who I consider my top teachers who imparted content to me at a level that was so particular and so consummate. And you're one of those, and I can tell you specifically what that was.
Yeah.
So you referenced your repertoire class, your styles class, and I can tell you the big lesson for me, although I don't know if it was ever explicitly stated,
Mhm.
was vocabulary
Uh-huh.
and how different styles you just can't like, you know, I had my Pat Martino
Mhm.
bag,
Yeah.
and that was great for a certain kind of thing, but it wasn't great for certain other things,
Right.
you know.
Right.
and
Yeah.
and and that was a big lesson, and it's one that I'm still kind of
Mhm.
working on, you know. So
Yeah.
if I could
Yeah.
offer you that compliment.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. So if you're doing these different styles, I mean, I don't know, were you, there was one year, it was a really wonderful year. And I let the fellows, that's another thing of it. I let the fellows sort of determine who we were going to study. So that's a big part of it too, right?
Yeah,
You don't come in and say, we're going to do Bird, then we're going to do Miles, then we're going to do
right.
Train, then we're going to do Wayne. That's it. Case closed. See you on Monday. You know, I was like, who do you guys want to study? You know, and, you know, we had some weird, not weird, but, you know, Oscar Peterson. I mean, it's obviously an incredible musician, but typically you wouldn't do a combo class doing Oscar Peterson tunes, but not that you can't. But we had that one year where it went Bill Evans, and then it went Ornette, and then it went Keith, and then it went Pat Metheny.
Wow.
And that was that your year, or was it before
No,
you?
that wasn't me.
That trajectory is unbelievable to go through because Bill's got his own thing. And then you go to Ornette and you're like, well, these two don't sound anything like each other, you know? Well, I mean, you know what I mean? They sound like each other, but they're jazz musicians from about the same period, but you don't think of a lot of congruity between the two, really, you know, different whole different bags. Then you get Keith and you go, I definitely hear Bill Evans happening in here, and I definitely hear Ornette happening in here. And you could hear it equally, and he'd have Ornette tunes or tunes that sounded awful like Ornette tunes. Then he'd play a standard, and he sounds like he's coming out of Bill Evans, whether he'll say it or not, I don't know. At any rate, so then you get Pat Metheny, and you're like, this is coming straight out of Keith. And then Pat Metheny's doing Ornette tunes, you know. And then you think, and then you hear Lyle Mays, and you're going like, there's an awful lot of Bill Evans or an awful lot of Keith. So that was just totally spontaneously created. We didn't plan that. It just happened. So those are some of the, you know, spontaneous kind of cool things that can come out of, you know, when you put together the curriculum, if you want to call it, you know, like that. They can happen. I remember we did idioms. Probably by the time you came around, I was probably big into my idiom thing and probably doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1s and talking about Barry Harris and all this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
I'm still dealing with that. I'm still struggling with that myself. How much of that to really impart, you know, because there is a element of pigeonholing vocabulary into the student, which I have sort of this adverse reaction to, yet I know in my mind this is what they need
Right.
if they really want to play like the stuff they're hearing on records. But part of me says, but don't do that, because then you're giving them the answers. So I'm still struggling with that personally.
Well, that was kind of what I meant in my compliment. You know, I mean, you taught me the bebop scales. I didn't
Oh,
know the bebop scales before I studied with you, and I can tell you, like, and among other things, right? But I can tell you that I was not mature enough probably at the time to really appreciate what that was, and in the
okay.
years since, I've kind of woken up like, wow, this actually is it, you know, for a certain kind of approach, you know.
Yeah. Right.
So I think that's a great point. I know we're losing time here. Could you talk for a moment about Bobby Hutcherson? At what point did you get to meet Bobby? And
Another one of those one moment in time can change your life things. So I had actually been uh did some pickup gigs with Bobby Hutcherson when I was much younger. I mean, what'll happen is Bobby had his own band, but occasionally some purchaser, some contractor would say, we really want you to come out to this venue and do a gig with a local rhythm section. And he would sometimes take it and sometimes wouldn't, depending on finances, who knows. So anyway, I did get to play with him once in a little pickup gig when I was in my 20s. I also got called to play a little pickup gig with him in my 30s, I believe, one time. But then one time I had a gig again, it was at a bar, I don't know, like a cafe with a Bay Area legend drummer whose name is Eddie Marshall. And it was a trio gig. and I'm playing with Eddie Marshall and this bass player, and we're just playing standards and stuff like that. And then, sure enough, for whatever reason, Bobby's current piano player, his West Coast piano player, either couldn't do some gigs or it wasn't working out or something like that. And Bobby would always just go to his. He didn't know who was around town and who was playing. He would just go to the guys in the band and say, "Hey, we need to get another piano player. Who should we get?" And Eddie just happened to remember me from this one. I'm telling you, it was a $50 gig at a cafe. And based on that, Eddie says, "There's this guy up in Sacramento. You should check him out." And so I get a call like 2 days later from Bobby's wife, who is sort of his manager, and says, "Bobby's interested in having you come down and do, a couple of gigs with the band, but he wants to meet you first. And can you come down?" And so I said, "Yeah, sure." So I drove down to his house, and it was cool. I just met him. I had already met him and played with him twice before, but he did not remember any of that. And so, I got down and he sat there and we played some tunes and I played some tunes and, just based on an hour with him, he says, "Yeah, this is good. Let's do this." So at first the gigs didn't happen. This is 2006, I think. There weren't a lot of gigs, but gradually over time, he started getting his band together and we played more, and he took me to Europe with him, and he took me to New York, and he took me to Boston, and he didn't have to do that. I mean, he could have gone to New York and just picked up, whoever he wanted in New York, but he took me with him a couple times, and he trusted me enough in that, and he respected me enough to do that. So that was 2007 until he passed in 2000. I think he passed in 2015, maybe 16, right around in there. So unbelievably great experience, obviously.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Joe. I know we're running out of time here, so just a final thing. Could you offer any parting advice to aspiring musicians, especially young musicians, and also aspiring educators? Someone who, like, I could absolutely see myself in a university
Yeah,
or
sure.
community college position. Any advice for what to do, especially
So,
during lockdowns, right?
yeah, okay. Well, so I think I'll curtail this down to young musicians who have gone through a conservatory or a state school experience where you've got a bachelor's degree, you got a master's degree, and now you're thinking of working your way into maybe a university position or something like that. I mean, the one thing would be to continue to work on your portfolio of things. So that means your teaching experiences privately, working on things like maybe potentially your own method book or your own transcriptions or your own compositions, keeping very organized about that stuff, making recordings to the degree that you can, continue pushing yourself in original compositions and making recordings, have a portfolio of things, any opportunities that might come up in, a college, any kind of education, working summer camps, any of those things, take any and all possibilities of things. You're basically just improving your portfolio of things so that, and then if you do get to an interview stage, take absolutely every interview you can possibly take, because you might be a long shot for a gig, but you're going to learn an awful lot in that interview process about things that will be asked, things to say, things not to say, that kind of stuff. So while people are in that sort of purgatory stage between college and maybe accepting or getting into a university position, I would just keep doing that, keep plugging away at your thing, keep believing in yourself, and keep keeping that portfolio of creative things together. That would be my basic, probably first best piece of advice for you.
Excellent, Joe. To close, I want to offer you some more compliments.
Oh, okay.
But these are from some of your students that I've had
Oh,
on this show.
oh, okay.
Luis Pino
Okay.
said that Joe Gilman is one of the most brilliant musical minds I've ever been around and the embodiment of humility.
Oh,
How about that? Glenn
oh,
Zaleski. Glenn Zaleski said one of the best pianists in the world and a doctor of music in the most genuine sense.
mm, mm, mm.
Joel Ross said the man taught us everything.
Oh.
So, Joe, thank you for teaching us
Okay.
everything.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
And thank you for being here. It's been awesome. It was great to hear about your trajectory
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
truly I see some personal goals in that,
yeah,
that
yeah,
I'm kind of working towards. So, and
yeah.
I'm sure people watching will as well. So,
Yeah, good. All right, Sean, thank you very much for having me on, and best of luck to you. And please reach out anytime that you want. Okay. Love hearing from
Absolutely.
you. All right.
Absolutely. All right, Dr. G. Thanks so much. Take care.
All right. Take care. All right.